Today's guest, Carrie Krehlik.
Being in those conversations, even if they're not solely related to the people practice, be part of the conversations when the discussion is happening about proxy statements and SEC filings and things like that. Be part of the conversations when the business development team is talking about options and alternatives. Be part of the conversations, especially, you become part of the conversation as an executive team member because you're at the table. But if you're at a more junior level or aren't able to be at the table, just continue to learn from all of those different aspects that make up an acquisition or make up a merger. And don't be shy to just ask questions and really think outside of just the people practices if your role is solely as an HR practitioner.
Carrie and I talked about her 30 years in the Bay Area, working across several industries from the pharmaceuticals industry and biotech, financial services, and technology. She was working at SAP before the whole competition with Salesforce came up, so before the internet boom came in, about crises, what we could learn from the .com crash, 2008 and now. Also about M&A and AI and how it could shape relationships, management, and admin tasks. So it's a very exciting episode to see different perspectives from different areas and eras. So dive into it and have fun.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with
To
empathy.
the people side.
Hey, Carrie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Thomas. It's nice to be here, and I hope you're starting into your evening while I'm starting my day here on the West Coast.
Yes, so in Berlin, it's exceptionally sunny today. And I think now it's 4:30 p.m. Central European time. So I have still maybe 3.5 more hours of light, and that's really nice.
Yes. I remember those days living in Germany and getting that extra sunlight, especially as the summer progressed.
And you cannot imagine how depressive it can get in Berlin if you stay in November, December, January, February, maybe even March. So maybe next year I will look into something else.
Yes, come to the West Coast of the US. Yes.
Oh, I would love to. Where are you actually located? Where are you actually located in the US?
Well, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and this is where I've lived for almost 30 years. Minus a year and a half when I lived in Germany and worked for SAP, which was a fabulous experience. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through our conversation. But aside from that, I've been in the Bay Area. I have spent the majority of my career here in the Bay Area working in either tech, life sciences, or the most recent 10 years of my career have been in the biotech or biopharma industry. So it's a great place to be. It's lots of opportunity, and the people have their pros and cons for living in the Bay Area, but I've always found it to be a place that's exciting and engaging and really highly innovative. So it's been a place that has kept me here and kept me excited about the opportunities.
Nice. Before maybe we go a bit into you as a person, could you describe how the Bay Area developed over the past years?
Sure. Well, I won't go back into the deep history, but there are all sorts of books and information that's been written about the progression of Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. Since I've lived here, which again has been almost 30 years, what I've really noticed is that innovation, even during those down times, and the entrepreneurial spirit continues to evolve. So when I first moved to the Bay Area in the mid 90s, even though I wasn't in the tech industry, it was obviously the place where people, wanted to wanted to have the experience. And at that time, the big tech companies were companies like Cisco and Intel and HP. And over the years, we've seen that evolve to Facebook and Google and Pinterest and companies that focus more on either social media or cloud-based systems. And then at the same time, we've seen a real, I think, uptick in the number of small biopharma companies that have really evolved from the likes of companies like Genentech, which is now Roche Genentech, but that they've evolved. And so Silicon Valley and the broader Bay Area is well known not only for tech, but also biopharma. And like I said, just lots of opportunity and lots of entrepreneurial spirit that you find in the Bay Area. A lot of that also comes from the schools that are around us. So we have two very well-known universities, which is the University of California, Berkeley, and then also Stanford University. So they really do tend to incubate a lot of ideas and thoughts and science that then get translated into companies. And then there are a number of other really well-known schools that also feed into that. So Santa Clara State, we also have UC Santa Cruz, UCSF. So many academic institutions that really bolster the mindset of academia translating into entrepreneurship, translating into productization.
And was it already expensive 30 years ago?
Oh, yes. It absolutely was. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that is a very easy question to answer. And the short answer is yes. It's always been expensive. I believe a lot of that also is because of the environment here. I grew up in the state of Ohio, which is in the Midwest here in the US. And, having spent many winters in cold, chilly conditions without any snow, coming to the Bay Area was really a treat. And being able to explore the hills, the mountains, the ocean, the bay is right outside our door. Great hiking trails. The ski slopes are just a few hours away if that's what you want to do in the time during snow season and in the winters. So I think there's much more that's here that causes people to want to come than just the business environment, and causes people to want to stay. And we've also seen, an exodus of people, especially in the last few years with the pandemic, where they don't have to be tied to an office and they don't have to be in a place where they have to commute every single day. So people have taken advantage of that as well, especially given the high cost of living and the interest in having, work-life balance that best fits each individual's needs.
Okay, so you would say there is also another way to attract people to the Bay Area than just the career trajectory you could have.
Absolutely, and it's like I said, it's got so much to offer, both in terms of the arts and the outdoor activities and wine country, which is just a short drive away if you want to go to Napa or Sonoma. So it really does bring people here. People want to stay here. And then again, if people feel like there's a better opportunity for them to establish a better, I would say, work-life balance, even though I know work and life is one continuum. But people do find that even having a connection to a company in the Bay Area is still possible without having to live in the Bay Area at this point in time.
And COVID, did it affect the Bay Area in terms of talent? Because I think a lot of people moved away from California, especially to Austin. Isn't that a new trend?
Yeah, Austin is a popular location. Denver and the Colorado area is a popular location. A lot of the mountain states like Idaho, Montana, Wyoming have become quite popular as well. I would say that COVID certainly affected the Bay Area just as it did every other part of not just the US, but the world. I think the one thing that we've found now that we're at kind of the I guess the tail end, maybe not the end, but the tail end of the pandemic, is that companies in the Bay Area still have flexibility. Most of them still have flexibility with employees not having to be in the office, at least not every single day. And therefore, you did see a lot of people that left the Bay Area and have decided to live elsewhere. And even in situations where they may be required to be in the Bay Area 1, 2, 3 days a week, many of them have found alternatives and either have worked out schedules where they can work fully remotely, or they come in and they commute into the Bay Area. They maybe live in a surrounding community that's outside the Bay Area, but close enough where they can commute in. Or in some situations, people have made decisions that they would move to other companies and work for companies that were flexible in being fully remote. So again, I think it's the pandemic has upended the way we worked historically. If I think back to when I started my career and it was in office every single day, at least 8 to 5, if not longer, and being able to give people that flexibility to work in a way that best suits them. And at the same time, the business needs to make sure that they're able to accomplish their goals and objectives. And it's that fine line and that balance that each company needs to navigate and is navigating with their employee population to identify how they meet both business needs and employee needs.
2 questions to that. What made you move to Germany, and what made you move then actually deciding to stay or go back to the Bay Area?
So when I moved to Germany, I had been working for SAP for about 5 years at that point, here in the Bay Area. In the mid-90s, SAP was building its brand outside of the European market. And they started what they defined at that point as a research and development arm here in the town of Palo Alto, which is also where Stanford is located. And at the time, it was about 200 employees. And we doubled in size the first year. And then I think we doubled in size again the second year. And so I was able to be part of SAP without having lived in Germany or on the East Coast, which is where the SAP commercial organization was located. I believe they're still located there. So I had a great experience and great opportunity for learning and growth and development. Still at a relatively early stage in my career with SAP.
Crazy. Just I wanted to zoom in shortly because that's, I think, also important in context for the listeners. Yesterday, I interviewed the COO for the sales and service organization of SAP Germany, and I just looked at the numbers. Now SAP makes 30 billion of revenue in 2022, and I think more than 50% is coming from the US, roughly.
Okay.
Just to give the context, so I didn't want to interrupt you, that the people know more than 20,000 people are now employed in the US, so it's the biggest market.
Yeah. And I think at the time, and again, my brain cells are firing here to go back in my memory bank from almost 20 years ago. But I think at the time that I joined SAP in 1997, between that time and the time that I ended up moving to Germany, I think SAP was around 10,000 employees at that time globally.
110.
Yeah, exactly. So it was still on the smaller side compared to where it is today. And it was also before it was known as a brand, and it certainly has evolved, and it's just been fascinating not only to be part of that many years ago, but also to see it continue to evolve and continue to know people who work there and that I stay connected to, albeit mostly through LinkedIn now, but just watching the progress and the evolution. So in terms of why I moved to Germany, It was the opportunity. I had such a fabulous experience working for SAP here in the US. And the opportunity that presented itself was one that would continue to evolve the way that SAP was looking at integrating what they were defining as their labs organizations, which were the R&D arms of SAP. And, at the time that I moved to Germany, which was in 2002, there were 8 different R&D locations, everywhere from Tokyo, all the way to the West Coast here of Palo Alto. And it really was an opportunity that somebody by the name of Stefan Ries and another gentleman by the name of Christoph Unterbrink saw that there could be a better cohesion and way of aligning people practices across those organizations versus every country doing what it needed to do, but without there being consistency and cohesiveness. And at that time, SAP was also starting to evolve a model of managerial span of control, where managers might sit in one country, but they would have team members in Bangalore and in the US and in Germany or in Israel. So they really needed.
And that was also that was also pre-Zoom calls, pre-video calls, wasn't it?
It was, yes. In fact, it was the monthly meetings that I had and I facilitated with the HR directors from those 8 different R&D locations. I'm remembering back now that it was a conference call. I mean, you had your Polycom or precursor to Polycom sitting in the middle of the table, and you might share some documents in advance, but there was not sharing of information in real time. And it was hard to read body language, and it was hard to really assess, what people were thinking and how they might be engaging. And on top of that, we had the time zone differences, where to get people from Japan all the way over to the West Coast of the US into a call all at the same time, even once a month, required colleagues in Japan to be on the phone at 11 p.m. their time, and colleagues here in the US on the West Coast to be on the phone at 6 a.m. their time. Not ideal times to be working, but it really did build a foundation for a way of operating that helped align and make sure that, again, the people practices were cohesive and making sure there was a better way for managers to be able to effectively lead and manage their team members, no matter where they were located across the world.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. What were the underlying principles at that time that made a manager or a management team or a team overall succeed versus fail?
I think it's the same or similar principles to what we have today, making sure that managers or leaders were able to create and articulate that vision that they had for their portion of the business, whatever that portion may be, making sure that they were able to link that to the higher level purpose of their technology group, their functional area, the organization, and then being very clear and making sure that team members, again, no matter where they were sitting, understood what their responsibilities were and being able to engage those individuals in executing and ensuring that whatever the activity or the project was completed according to the guidelines that had been established and had been agreed to at the very beginning of the project or the program. So I still see those same principles in many respects in how leaders operate today. You have to create a compelling vision. You have to be able to link that vision down to the individual level and help people understand how they connect and how they are able to ensure that they're making that contribution. I think the one thing that has transitioned, if I might speak to that for a moment, but I think the one thing that has become more important and maybe wasn't as much in focus 20 or even 30 years ago was that connection between what the employee is also exceptionally good at and what they want to do, and aligning that to what the organization needs. And I think at my early time at SAP, we were starting to tap into that. And I think it was more, it happened organically versus strategically in some cases. And I do believe that companies now are looking more proactively at those opportunities and identifying, what is Thomas really good at? What is Carrie really good at? What does Thomas want to do? And are we positioning
And what is he
Thomas?
not good at?
What is he not good at? Yeah, let's not put Carrie or Thomas into a situation where we know they're not going to excel or they're not going to thrive. And most horrifically, they might fail. And while failure can be a good thing and you learn a lot from it, you also really want to make sure that you're not putting people into a situation where, as a leader, you already can see that the person doesn't have the chance to be successful. So that, I think, is the thing that has come more to the forefront in those conversations, and how leaders lead and how they're expected to lead, and to ensure success, not only for the employee, but also for their team and for the organization.
And so through the role you got offered at SAP, you then moved to Germany because also you wanted to move to Germany, or you wanted a specific role?
I enjoyed my time when I was traveling to Germany and to Europe in general. And I thought it was a great opportunity to explore being there on, I was actually hired on local conditions, explore the potential to be an employee in a country outside of the US, because I'd only ever worked in the US, and also because of the role itself. And having been in one of those 8 labs organizations that was trying to figure out how do we ensure that people in Palo Alto or in the US that were working in various industry groups could be successful, but also how did we ensure that managers who at that time were mostly either in the US or sitting in Germany could also have team members that they felt were producing, but also as engaged as possible. And so being able to do that on a macro level and not just in one particular location was very intriguing. And the other thing that I really admire about SAP, especially at that time in the thought process, was SAP was really looking to bring people from various locations in other countries into the headquarters in Waldorf. And the thought there at that time was, we want to become an international company. We want to be thoughtful in how we operate on a global basis. And that gave them the opportunity to bring really talented individuals that I had the pleasure of working with. A number of team members came in from Bangalore, had a number of team members that I got to work closely with from other countries that relocated to Germany. And it was just a real melting pot at a time when SAP was growing. They were quite successful. They didn't need to do that, but I thought it was forward thinking. And I give a lot of credit again to Stefan Ries and to Christoph Unterbrink for putting that out there, and for making sure that SAP was thinking about not only how does the business evolve in terms of product and being a global competitor from a product perspective, but how do they ensure that they're bringing the best ideas and the best thoughts from around the world, given all of the investment that they had made and continue to make in companies that had been acquired or companies that they started from the ground up in various locations.
How was your connection with Stefan Ries? I think you said you at some point reported into him, I guess, right?
I reported into a gentleman by the name of Christoph Unterbrink, who
Okay.
reported into Stefan. And please don't ask me what Stefan's title was at that point, because again, that was so many years ago. But it was such an honor and a privilege to be there, to be part of the HR organization in Germany, and to be doing this very important work, but also to get to work with those two gentlemen, and learn a lot from them, as I was continuing to evolve my career.
I really like your background and the variety of it and also the expertise in it, because you started in the early days of software where it was still, I would say, enterprise, because you started at SAP where Salesforce was not even existing and they took everything into the cloud basically, right? They kind of created the category SaaS.
Yes, exactly. And that goes back to the evolution of what you see, not just globally, but especially here in the Bay Area. You get some really hallmark companies that people join early in their career, and then they springboard from there and either start their own companies. I believe Mark Benioff used to work at Oracle, if I remember correctly. Please don't quote me on that, and a lot of entrepreneurs come out of these well-established, well-known organizations and take their thoughts and their ideas into that next phase. And I'm not yet at that stage where I feel like I could write a book, but just being part of the ecosystem and part of the environment, and then thinking back to what it looked like in the mid-90s when I first arrived here, it'll be fascinating to see what these next 20, 30 years bring here in the Bay Area, and what the evolution looks like, not only for technology, but also the evolution across many industries, including biopharma.
On the SAP website, there is also a statement that I think 99 out of the 100 biggest organizations are running on SAP. And I think
Wow.
the one organization that is not running on SAP is maybe Salesforce. Could that be?
That's a very good guess, Thomas.
Can you share a bit about the competitiveness back then when Salesforce came out? Because they were really aggressive, also on Siebel systems, I guess, and they were also in the Bay Area, because there was in the book of Mark Benioff, Behind the Cloud, a story where they had a conference on on-premise software, and then they came in front of the conference with, let's say, like a demo, and said no software, but not software general, but no on-premise software, and they wanted to took everything into the cloud, and it was a marketing genius. Did you also see a bit of that time, maybe from a hiring perspective, that companies started to poach each other's talent? Was it aggressive, or did it get more aggressive at some point when the internet really came?
I would say I wouldn't say that there's a point in time where you see an uptick. I would say it's constant. And I can speak not only about my time at SAP, but I also worked for another very well-known company that is headquartered in Stockholm, or outside of Stockholm, in Kista. And you had a company they acquired here in the Bay Area, and it's Ericsson, and it was at the time, and still is, a competitor with key companies such as Cisco, and others that focus on that portion of the industry. And there is always, even in downtimes like what we had in 2008, or even what we're experiencing to some degree now with a number of well-known large organizations going through rounds of layoffs, which is unfortunate for many reasons. But the ability for companies, especially those that are at maybe earlier stages and are recognizing that key talent, just because somebody has their job eliminated doesn't mean that they weren't highly productive and weren't making a significant contribution to an organization. And I think companies that are forward thinking are always paying attention to the competitive landscape when it comes to talent. And they're always on top of who are those key companies that we want to attract talent from, and how do we ensure that we stay in touch with those individuals, knowing that at some point they may be willing or they may be in a position where they're looking for that next opportunity. And so the talent acquisition mindset, especially here in the Bay Area, is one of constantly staying on your toes. And I've never seen a moment, even in the dot-com bust, and even with the 2008 round of financial issues that we saw, and then also again now, I've never seen companies that have completely put their hiring practices on hold in a way where they just stop recruiting completely. They're always in the process of thinking proactively about how they want to bring people into the organization and who those key talents are.
And what is competition doing to an organization, in your opinion? It's a broad question.
I think it's making an organization more innovative, thinking about ways that they need to accelerate their thought processes. And I can speak most clearly from the HR side, the people side. But just because several years ago, the only way we could engage people to come to an organization was for them to physically be in a location where we had an office, and that required them to potentially move or relocate. Here we are in a situation now where individuals and companies have had to rethink, what does that relationship look like? And that is also competition, where you're making sure that you're looking at how do you bring people into the organization? How do you engage those individuals? How do you retain those individuals in a way that maybe wouldn't have worked historically, but requires you to rethink how you operate and how you can make sure that people are joining the organization and staying at the organization in a way that fits the needs of the company now. So I think the nimbleness and the agility of organizations, because they've had to be that way to compete, makes an organization all that much more primed for success, and primed for ensuring that not just the product side of the organization is successful, but how they manage their people practices can also be successful as they compete and as they innovate.
Super interesting. We have an episode exactly on that, agility and leanness of an organization, with Daniel Vonnier. He also was at SAP for quite some time and worked with Stefan and me together at some point. Now I would like to...
Circle.
It's all connected. And
Yes.
I would be interested in your approach on how you would create an organization that is lean, but also has the process, or maybe not the processes, but the right principles and structures in place, that the fundamentals are there, but that you're not non-agile, right? That you're like in a waterfall, administrative heavy, strict environment. So you as an HR professional, what do you think, what is the right balance?
So this is something that I absolutely had to think about, especially in the last 10 years working in smaller biopharma companies. The great thing about where I started my career was I worked in large organizations that had infrastructure, had process, and we were able to use that to our advantage. Then when I shifted and went into my very first small company in 2013, all of a sudden it was, how do we do as much as is needed and as much as is appropriate for the organization, but without overwhelming the organization. And then fast forward to a company that I worked for starting in 2017, which was a biopharma company that at that time only had 25 employees. It was preclinical, and it was a very, very early stage. And it was the phenomenal opportunity to lay that foundation and think very clearly about what that 3 to 5 year plan needed to look like, but also what it needed to look like in alignment with the business strategy and in alignment with what employees needed and wanted at those times without, to your point, it being administratively heavy. I think the biggest challenge that so many HR professionals in particular face is that, you know, especially if they've had the privilege of working in a large organization, you see all the bells and whistles, you see all the great programs, all of the opportunity. And if you make that transition into a smaller company, and I highly recommend that people take that opportunity because I think it gives you just that experience beyond just working in one type of environment your whole career. But if you have that opportunity, I think a downfall that is very easy to, or a pitfall, I should say, that's very easy to fall into is thinking that, well, I'm going to take all the great stuff that I used to see at company X that was 10,000 people or 100,000 people, and within a year, I'm going to fit that into a company that is 50 people or 100 people or even 500 people. And being able to think about what those building blocks are and starting with those foundational elements of, you know, making sure that certainly people have their benefits and their payroll taken care of. You have the legal and compliance requirements taken care of. But then what are those other things that people need? And I would say the key building blocks are, how are we bringing people into the organization? Are we effective in going out and attracting people? Do we have the right brand? And doesn't need to be lots of flash and bright colors, but are we out there marketing ourselves in the way that will attract the target audience that we want and we need? And what's our strategy behind that? Then are we clear in how we're onboarding people and giving them the tools and the resources to be successful as early as possible and stay connected to the organization at a very early stage so that that engagement level not only hits a high mark very, very early, but continues to hit high marks throughout that employee's career? Are we clear with people of what's expected of them? So that becomes I would say, the more traditional performance process. But again, it doesn't have to be heavyweight. It doesn't have to be lots of pages in an online form or lots of time that managers or employees need to spend inputting data. It can be as simple as ongoing conversations and listening. And then are we compensating people appropriately, not only at the time we bring them in, but at the time that we go through annual cycles? And that will look different from company to company, depending upon the life cycle and the stage that they're at. So I think there's common building blocks that you can put in place without it being exceptionally heavyweight. And I like to think that I was able to lead that effort and to manage that at one of my previous companies in a way that we could also take those building blocks and add on to that over the course of time so that it wasn't just static. It was something that evolved, especially around people development and how we integrated a listening strategy, et cetera, as the company evolved and grew and moved into clinical stage progression at that biopharma.
Wow. So also by industry, you would say the organizations really need to have different attributes at different stages, because I just dive into the pharma biotech company industry a bit because I was fully always focusing on tech And people with, or companies with the tech DNA, they're usually a bit more agile and have leaner structures, need them over time, especially when more money gets deployed.
Yeah.
And in the pharmacy industry, it's it's way more riskier, right? Because as you said, you have these development phases, and there you first just need to check, is the product working? And if yes, then you need to launch it, and then you need to build a real organization. But then it can be also a multi-million revenue product already, right? Which is really just going through the roof, and you need to market and sell it.
Yeah, well, and I would say that the rigor associated with building the organization, even in advance of, certainly in advance of getting into clinical stage, but certainly even more so in advance of getting to commercial stage, it's a requirement, because there's such a heavy regulatory environment.
Yes.
And I'm not just speaking about the US, but I'm speaking about all countries, and you making sure that individuals employees have the right infrastructure, again, to succeed, whether they're in research and are bench scientists, whether they are in clinical operations, whether they are focusing on supply chain issues, supply chain topics, in making sure that the operational aspects, whether it's finance or facilities or IT or HR, that those are also in place. And then, at the time that the company sees that the regulatory authorities are heading down a path and potential approval is anticipated, that being able to build up that commercial organization and that commercial infrastructure. So the investment is quite heavy, not only in terms of the scientific investment and the lab activities and the modeling, but also in terms of the people investment, and being able to strike that right balance and do it in a way that, to your point, with technology deployment, you can see that path pretty quickly, and there's usually many ways that you can optimize the workforce planning to get to a quick path and get product out into the market quickly. In biopharma, it's a much longer progression, a much longer process. And yet you need the people, whether they're full-time employees or contractors or operations, third-party operations teams that you partner with or create alliances with. But you need all of that in order to even get the product into clinical phase. And that's what I find so fascinating. And not having spent all of my career, but having spent now about 10 years of my career in this particular industry, is recognizing the investment and the rigor that goes into getting a product out to patients. And I've been lucky enough that all of the companies that I've worked for have been in the what's considered to be rare disease or orphan disease space, where it's really, the products are focusing on meeting needs of a typically unmet need, or a patient population that has their needs unmet. And so that's also been very rewarding to be part of this industry and be part of these companies that focus in that area.
And especially with the whole progress of AI and the technology platform you get from it, I think you can be way faster in analyzing and gathering a lot of data, isn't it? Isn't it a big progress and step?
Yeah, I think we're at such early stages with AI and how that would really get deployed in organizations. And I don't know that I'm the best person to speak to that, but I do think that it will be fascinating to see how AI helps organizations accelerate across all facets of their product life cycle, and their research life cycle, their clinical life cycle. And I think there's so much more that can be done. But I also know there's a lot of concerned with AI and how it gets used and how it gets deployed. And I think that will be the big test is AI being used for good purposes, or is it being used for inappropriate purposes? And I think that'll be the next test.
What are your guesses?
How it gets deployed.
What are your guesses for AI used in organizations or in business for management purposes?
Well, I see great opportunity for efficiency in the HR practices, the people practices. And I don't mean the people practices where we should be taking time to really have good conversations, like managers having regular, good, rigorous, productive conversations with employees about how they're doing, how their work is progressing, what they need more of. That should not be left to chance and to technology. What should be left to technology are those practices that are administrative. You asked previously about how do you balance putting the right principles and foundational practices in place while not becoming too administratively heavy. I think there's a lot of administrative activity that companies just cannot circumvent. And it relates to various compliance requirements. It relates to being able to get people onto payroll. Some of the simple things that I think there is greater opportunity for how technology will support that. And, being able to answer employee questions, basic questions, not, questions they should be asking their manager about help me understand what steps I can take to progress my career. Those questions are a good conversation for manager and employee. But the questions where somebody says, I can't find my pay statement, how do I get to that?
Oh my God.
That's
AI
the kind of
payroll, that would be a game changer.
But I mean, it's those kinds of basic questions where employees still, unfortunately, have to spend a lot of time. And
Yes.
I can speak for myself that, especially if you get into a smaller organization where, you add this particular technology solution and this particular, and now you have your travel solution and now you have your expense reporting solution, that they don't always tie together. Companies don't always have the advantage of working with an SAP or a Salesforce or an organization that really is enterprise wide. Sometimes they're adding as it makes sense and looking at best in class solutions. And then employees have trouble finding what they need. And so I think it's those simple things that we've created some complexity around just by nature of organizations trying to move fast, that then we can take advantage of new technology to help become more efficient and effective. And then give employees the opportunity to focus on the things they really want to focus on, which is how do I get through this next project in a way that's going to be best for the product, best for my team, et cetera. That's really where we want people focusing, is thinking forward on the work that they need to do in a way that's engaging and productive.
Also, there are some new jobs already out there where people just get hired to train certain AI services. And I think that can be a game changer, especially just imagine you could just work 3 days a week and get the same pay because you have the same output, and 2 days of your work, let's say, is optimized away because the whole repetitiveness, the whole I don't find the right information somewhere and I need to research, or I'm stuck with admin. If this can be automated or just be very, very much optimized, oh my God, that would be a game changer also for the quality of life of people.
Yeah, completely agree. And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about, where do we want employees spending their time? And we want them spending their time on those things that not only are valuable for the organization, but are valuable for them, that give them development, that give them opportunity to grow, that give them the opportunity to more fully engage in the area that they are the subject matter expert. And what causes disengagement is thinking about I have to complete this expense report. Yes, I know it's technically easy to do, but I need to at least find the link to where the expense report is because I just started my job, 3 weeks ago. So it's those kinds of things that I think people can easily become disengaged because of the administrative burden. And yeah, let's figure out a way to minimize their frustration and keep them engaged in the right way with what they have been hired to do, which is produce great product or capability for the organization in a way that best meets their skill set.
Another idea that is, I think, more sophisticated to then the basic admin part would be, what if somebody could just take a virtual AI assistant or buddy or co-manager, which is just listening to all the conversations and then giving you feedback on how this might be perceived by somebody. And when you have a certain goal, like I want to become a more empathetic manager, and then you just train the technology to listen and then give you feedback on maybe here you should have reacted or acted differently to get that outcome. This would be also cool. Also a bit creepy.
I absolutely think that is the next phase. Just as a side note, there was a great article in the New York Times maybe a month ago about one of the reporters for the New York Times using, I think it was the AI from Microsoft, and that it basically guided him, maybe it was the Chat GPT, but it guided him to manage his relationship differently with his wife, if I remember correctly. And so it was something that got quite a few eyeballs, because it was a little scary to think about, AI telling you how to manage your relationship. So I think there's something there, Thomas. I think we probably should make sure that we've worked out all the kinks with the administrative side of things.
I would also say so, yeah, because it's also fun to manage relationships, right? And it's also part of the relationship to invest into it, isn't it?
Exactly. So anyway.
Okay, so we covered already a lot, and I would like to really get a bit more of your experience with acquisitions, because you did a lot and you saw a lot there, and I think it's still a big topic, and it's an interesting topic. So can you tell us a bit more about how you have been involved in acquisitions and what maybe the listeners can learn from it?
Sure. So I would never say that I had M&A on my my professional bingo card, so to speak, but I've recognized that over the last 10 to 15 years, I've been through 5 acquisition integrations, and all of those have been really important and phenomenal opportunities for the people that are receiving the end product. Several of those were in technology, but most recently, I've been in organizations where the acquisitions have been by larger pharma companies, and the opportunity that has presented itself to patients and being able to get access to the therapeutic from those different companies at a much faster pace is really what is important and most important and drove the business decision for those acquisitions. So that's the really good part of being part of these acquisitions, is the ability to impact patients, especially those patients that have unmet medical needs, in a much more proactive and accelerated manner. So with that, my very first what I would consider to be M&A experience was with an organization that was technically acquired, but it was really a merger of a company, 2 companies that were about equal market cap and about equal number of employees. And that was phenomenal experience for me, because what those organizations did as part of that acquisition integration or merger integration was that they hired a third-party consulting firm, and that happened to be Deloitte. And Deloitte came in and really helped both organizations manage the full integration process. Everything from integration of research through manufacturing, through commercial, through all of the operations. And I was lucky enough to be part of one of the work streams that focused on the people practices. So being able to be part of that at that scale and see what a rigorous approach to integration looked like served me so well as I went through additional integrations, because every integration after that was at a much smaller scale and didn't have...
How big was the market cap of the both companies that was the first integration?
I believe at the time both companies were about $1 billion in market cap, if I remember correctly. This was about 15 years ago.
And both private companies?
No, they were public companies.
Both public, okay.
And yeah, so it was
the organizational size, roughly?
The organizational size of both companies was both companies were about 5,000 employees globally.
Oh, wow! And 15 years ago, 1 billion. It would be way more today.
Yeah. So anyway, that learning and being part of that, even though my piece of it was a very small piece, but just being in the room and being part of those meetings that happened on a regular basis as the leaders were looking at how these two companies were coming together was fabulous learning that I just absorbed every single bit and piece of that, and then took that with me, especially around the change process, the communications that are critical as employees go through change, and really thinking about the structured approach that needs to take place as you move through an integration. Most importantly, looking at culture and what is the culture fit between the two organizations.
In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
So then, fast forward to some of my most recent experiences. And granted, those experiences have been with much larger companies purchasing smaller biopharma companies, but being able to think about which people practices, which integration practices, which strategies make the most sense, and being able to have those conversations with my counterparts at those companies. And at the end of the day, the acquiring company is the company that makes the decisions about employee retention and how the integration occurs and which functional areas are needed or not needed as part of the integration. But being able to have a good conversation and a constructive conversation and bring my point of view or the point of view of the acquired company to the table is critically important. And being able to bring perspective of how are the employees going to feel? What are the things that acquiring company needs to consider, pay close attention to, and then being able to move through that in helping through that change process. I will say, Thomas, that some of the things aside from the actual integration that I have really enjoyed, but I never expected when I thought about being in HR 30 years ago, never expected that I would necessarily be part of it, is also some of the not just the diligence process, but the negotiation process and being able to be an active partner in that even before a deal is announced. I've gone through not only several acquisitions, I went through a reverse merger, being able to also think about the SEC requirements and the filing requirements and all of the legal and compliance elements, and being, again, part of those conversations, even though my subject matter area was on the people side, but being able to build that business acumen and that business mindset and thinking about how some of those decisions then would play out as we considered messaging to the employees, as we considered how the integration would look, as we considered how we would influence and partner with the acquiring company to make sure that employees were best taken care of based on the purpose and the rationale behind the acquisition itself. So my message to anybody who's out there who is, looking at being part of a company that may be acquired or may be acquiring other companies is just take full advantage of being in those conversations, even if they're not solely related to the people practice. Be part of the conversations when the discussion is happening about proxy statements and SEC filings and things like that. Be part of the conversations when the business development team is talking about options and alternatives. Be part of the conversations, especially, you become part of the conversation as an executive team member because you're at the table. But if you're at a more junior level or aren't able to be at the table, just continue to learn from all of those different aspects that make up an acquisition or make up a merger. And don't be shy to just ask questions and really think outside of just the people practices if your role is solely as an HR practitioner or people practice.
I can totally agree. I was involved in 3 integrations and acquisitions, and as a consultant, the smallest one was just 20 people and the biggest one was 600 people. So I can totally agree that if you are not pushing, or maybe not even pushing, but just be active to get the information, because otherwise you cannot anticipate what is coming. You never can anyway all the time, but especially with acquisitions and integrations, sometimes I was surprised how unclear the strategy of the acquisition and integration is when already when the deal was already done.
Yeah.
And from the outside with the whole PR piece, and if you just see that piece, then you think, oh wow, they acquired it and it's done. But no, okay, the deal was closed and now you need to announce it and then the work actually starts.
Well, that and being able to create that or make sure that red thread is running through every conversation, every communication, the rationale for the deal, the what happens next for me as an employee, what should I expect?
Yeah, the mood is so important, to manage the mood.
Exactly. And I would say that while employee listening is something we've talked about in the last hour, is making sure that managers are staying in touch with their team members, that employee listening component, whether formalized through pulse surveys or one-on-one conversations, but managers having the tools and the HR team giving managers the tools to have those regular conversations. Yeah. I think the hardest part for managers, especially if it's a larger organization and there's managers who are working with their employees and trying to help them understand what the rationale is and how this might impact them, they might be in the exact same boat because they are asking those questions because they're also an employee. So I think the importance of listening, the importance of communicating and responding to those questions that employees have cannot be overstated. And
raising your voice. If you spot something, really raising your voice. It's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that we did at my most recent company, and we put this in place shortly before the acquisition was announced, but we had just converted to a regular pulse survey. And we were using a technology solution where it did use AI. It was able to intelligently assess kind of the key topic areas that were hot buttons for individuals. And we had just started to deploy that technology solution. The acquisition was announced. So we took that technology solution and pivoted and said, we're not going to obviously ask the same questions that we asked in the last round or two of pulse surveys, we're just going to focus on 3 questions and really getting at how are you feeling? What questions do you have? What can we answer for you? And being able to then take that and make sure that we were deploying that through our employee communications, through our regular employee meetings that we were having between the time of announcement and the time of actual deal close, and just reiterating, please give us your thoughts, give us your ideas. And even in those instances where the answer was the same from week to week, or we didn't have an answer, because there are certain things that you just don't have answers to until a certain point. And we
because
just
the decision is
wanted to
always
be
depending on
transparent.
and the decision is always depending on the other decision that is pending on another decision that is pending on
It-
another decision.
Exactly. So I think, listening, and giving people the opportunity to have a voice in various ways, and making sure that there's different channels that they can access to have their voice heard.
I could talk for hours about that. Okay, but let's.
Well, I would say the other thing, Thomas, as a key learning for me over the years, is that everybody thinks, well, I've been through one acquisition or one merger, the next one probably will look the same. I've never seen the exact same makeup or playbook deployed for acquisitions. And I think that, again, is something where being able to be agile, be nimble, think about what has happened in the past and learn from that, but recognizing that just because you've seen 15 different things or 15 different aspects of an acquisition doesn't mean that all 15 of those are going to show up in this next one, or that any of them are going to show up. And it might just be a brand new playbook that you have to build. So being able to work in the moment and use history, but also not rely on history.
Yes, love it. A question to you. Is there a guest that I should interview next, which is top of mind for you?
Ooh. Oh my goodness, you put me on the spot.
That's part of the question.
You so put me on the spot. I think, somebody like Stefan Rees, who I know you've already interviewed, is coming to top of mind for me. I think there are so many really amazing people professionals in so many different industries. I can't speak to a person, Thomas, but I'm wondering if there's somebody at an organization where they're starting to use AI, or starting to think about how to use AI for their for further engagement and efficiency. So that's one thought. I also think that somebody that's a thought leader like Stephen Rice, who is an amazing people leader. I first became aware of Stephen when he worked at Juniper Networks. He went on to lead the HR function at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he's now the head of HR at a biotech company here in the Bay Area called VIR, V-I-R. So he's one that I often see as really representing future thinking in the HR community. So he's one that I suggest.
First of all, sorry for putting you on the spot, but
No.
that's also the fun of the question. Okay, do you know him, and could you make an intro, or do I need to do cold outreach? I'm fine with both.
I know him. But not exceptionally well. I'm sure I could work to make the introduction, but it might be more effective for you to contact him directly.
Yes. So let's wait until your episode is released, and then I will
Okay.
use this as an approach to say, hey, we talked
Yep.
about you. What about interviewing next?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are so many really, again, phenomenal forward-thinking people practitioners, people leaders, HR leaders across the globe.
Yes.
Another one, now that you've asked me the question, some
Maybe in
others
the
are,
future I should brief the guests that this question will come. It's
that's right.
beneficial for me.
And another person that could be really fascinating, when I mentioned that there were so many really phenomenal team members that SAP was bringing into Germany from other locations, there was a gentleman who I know has gone on to lead a number of organizations, and his name is Bhuvan, Bhuvan, and his last name is Naik, Naik. And Bhuvan also worked closely with Stefan, and he and I were in Germany at the same time. And at the time, Bhuvan worked as the right-hand person, the chief of staff to the head of HR, who was a gentleman by the name of Les Heyman, who has since passed away. But Bhuvan was there, and I know Bhuvan, I think he came to the US at one point with SAP and had an assignment here, and then he's now back in India. But he's had really just a phenomenal track record of people practices. And I think it would be really fascinating if this is a path you and your company want to go down, is to get perspective of others in other countries.
Yeah. So our core market, I would say, is still companies that are from Germany and go and have international footage, or go into Germany, because it's just, we're still small, like 10 to 20 people, and therefore you need to focus. But we already have the exposure to other markets, and that's definitely our ambition.
Yeah. So I think Bhuvan, actually Bhuvan might be a better fit only because Stephen Rice sometimes, I don't know how open he is sometimes to to things like this.
Yeah, it's also very cheeky that I ask you that. Yeah, so I would never expect that this is going to happening, but I just try.
No. But I think Bhuvan would be somebody that really would be able, I think he'd be a great interview too. Really engaging, and I think you'd enjoy the conversation, and your listeners would enjoy the conversation.
I just give a try to both, and I will keep you up to date. Carrie, it was really nice talking to you. Any final words?
My final comments for individuals who are either in HR leadership roles or aspiring to move into more senior HR leadership roles is just take advantage of every opportunity. Take advantage of every single business conversation, take advantage of every discussion and opportunity to insert yourself in ways that are even outside your own comfort zone, and make sure that you're continuing to fill, as I say, the bingo card of your career, so that you continue to learn, grow, develop, and make those contributions in a way that fulfills you as a professional as well.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon or evening.
And you, a great day ahead.
Okay, bye.